Hello everybody, my name is Caitlin and welcome back to my channel. Today I am very excited to finally talk about Terrifier 2. This video will contain spoilers, so just keep that in mind if you haven't seen the film yet. I actually saw Terrifier 2 back on Halloween, but between work and grad school, I just haven't had the time to film a video until now. It's also taken me a bit of time just to think about the film and think about how I feel about it overall. And after a few weeks, I have to be honest and say, I don't really feel any particular way about it. I'm very much in the camp of, I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. I will say up front that I don't think I'm really the audience for Terrifier 2. While I don't mind gore in horror films, that's not the reason that I go to the genre. That's not the reason why I love the genre. And this is a film that is very much made for people that love gore. And for the most part, I have to say that the special effects in this film are very well done. They're very visceral and gross to look at. There are a few scenes here and there where the blood looks a little corn syrupy. I don't know if they were starting to run out of budget, but overall, these special effects are very well done. So I didn't have many expectations going into this film other than knowing that it was going to be very gory. I remember seeing the first Terrifier film back in 2018, and to be honest, again, when I think back on that first film, I don't really remember that much about it. I obviously remember the stuff with Art the Clown and him stalking the two girls. I very much remember that infamous kill scene with the one girl and she's fully nude and he just saws her in half. So it was a film that I watched and then kind of forgot about until it was announced that the sequel would be released this October. Luckily, you don't really need to have seen the first film or remember much about the first film to enjoy Terrifier 2. And even though this is a sequel, Terrifier 2 very much feels like the start of this universe, the beginning of this world building that the director is doing. And I believe that the director actually had this story in mind from the very beginning. He just didn't have the budget or the means to make it. One thing that I appreciate about this film is that it's exactly what you expect going into it. This is not a film that's trying to have some, deep message thrown in there. It's not trying to be any more than what it is. I would say my biggest complaint about this film is just its length. It is very long at, 2.5 hours? I actually had to split this up into 2 separate viewings, which I did not want to do. I don't like doing that. But, life, it's been a busy fall. But I feel like with a film like this, where it's so heavily focused on the gore and the special effects and just the shock value of that, I find that the longer it goes on, the more the shock and awe of the special effects kind of wears off. For me, it just loses that shock factor the longer that the film goes on. Had it been a bit tighter, a bit shorter, I think the special effects would have been even more impactful. Other things that I liked about Terrifier 2 would definitely be the aesthetics. I really loved the vintage look of this film. It had a very, going to the video store in the 80s or 90s and picking up an old VHS and popping it in. It had that kind of feel and quality to it, that graininess. And I thought I did a great job of capturing that look, but still keeping the film in a modern time setting. I feel like one of the only other directors off the top of my head that does that very vintage 80s look really well is Ty West. But his films always tend to be more period pieces, right? Set in the 70s and the 80s. So it felt refreshing to see someone being able to recreate that look, but still keeping it in a modern time period. I also really liked the final girl in this, Sienna. I loved her whole badass angel costume that she wears throughout the film. I have to say, between Sienna's costume and then the younger female clown that's working with Art, this film offers many great ideas for future Halloween costumes, which I appreciated. So yeah, I really liked Sienna as a character. I thought she was fun to follow around. I know some people were annoyed by the fact that it never really feels like Sienna is in any real danger throughout the film. And while I agree with the criticism that she definitely has plot armor, I guess it didn't bother me that much because I feel like most final girls in horror films have plot armor. I think what felt off-putting about her final battle with Art at the end is that the film at times wants to throw in these supernatural elements. It's set up through the film that Sienna has some sort of connection to Art. They say that she's the chosen one. She's the Buffy Summers who is put on Earth to fight Art the Clown. There's also something with her father and him predicting Art the Clown, and something with a magic knife. At first I thought that Art was either Sienna's dad or her father's spirit was somehow in Art the Clown. And my reasoning for thinking that is because Sienna's friends, there's a scene with her friend and the friend's boyfriend, they're in the car, and the friend is giving a lot of exposition about Sienna's father and how he essentially went crazy and started hallucinating and then eventually killed himself. And at the very beginning of the film, there's the scene where Art is in the laundromat and he meets the female clown. And there's another person in the laundromat that's sleeping, and when they wake up, they see Art the Clown, but they don't see the other female clown. And so my first thought was that Art was hallucinating the young female clown. And so I was like, oh, okay, so Art is hallucinating, Sienna's dad was hallucinating, maybe there's some connection there. But I don't think there is. At least the film didn't make it very clear. Also, we see other characters that see the female clown, so it's not Art just hallucinating her. But yeah, I feel like the supernatural elements and the mythology kind of took me out of the film at times. I also have to say that there were a lot of genuinely creepy moments throughout this film. One of my favorite scenes is when Sienna is in the Halloween store and she's shopping for the wings for her costume. And she runs into Art the Clown, who is just staring at her, and he's blocking the entryway for her to be able to exit. Scenes like that had genuine moments of suspense and tension. There were other scenes where you would have characters who were hiding, or they were just in a room and you would see Art the Clown just slowly enter behind them. And there was no music or really any sound to set it up. He just kind of casually walks in, which, I don't know, for some reason for me just felt so creepy. I think this really could have been a very chilling little slasher film had it pulled back a little bit, because again, for me, the longer it went on, the less scary it became, the less effective the gore was. I did really enjoy Art the Clown. He's a pretty fun slasher villain. He has a cool look about him, and he at least has a sense of humor, which is more than I can say for a lot of other film characters these days. The only thing I didn't like is the scenes where he's using a machine gun. Again, this is just a personal preference on my part, but I do not like guns in my slasher films. I feel like it cheapens the whole experience. It felt a little too close to home given a lot of the tragedies that we've had around gun violence in America. It's hard for me to say if I think the Terrifier series is going to go on to become a horror classic. It definitely has all of the elements there. I just think its excessive focus on gore is what's always going to keep it kind of on the fringe. I think its lack of story and character development is what's going to prevent it from assimilating into mainstream pop culture in the way that you see with like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, right? Those are series that even people who may not like horror can still enjoy and appreciate, especially around Halloween time. But Terrifier definitely wants to be on the extreme end of things, so I'm not sure if it's going to have that mainstream appeal. I guess time will tell. And I have seen some criticism online of people saying that horror fans should want something better than a film like Terrifier, which is only focused on the killing. And while I can see where those people are coming from, I feel like the horror genre has always had films like Terrifier. Right, in the mid-2000s, you had the very extreme horror films that were coming out of places like Asia and Europe. You also had the torture porn cycle in the US with films like Saw and Hostel. Obviously, those films tended to have more of a narrative aspect to them, but also, let's be real. Nobody was going to Saw for the plot and the characters. We were all going to the theater because we wanted to see how insane the traps were going to get, and we wanted to see all of the creative ways that the characters were going to die. You also had all of the B movies and the grindhouse films of the 70s and 80s. Like, off the top of my head, I'm just thinking about all of the cannibal films that came out of Italy at that time. Even going back all the way to the 1800s with the Grand Guignol theaters in Paris, right? Humans have always had a fascination with the gory, with the taboo. We just seem to have a sick curiosity to know what our insides look like. And while Terrifier 2 is certainly not medically accurate by any means, it's still following in that tradition of all of these other films and art forms. And you may argue that there is no merit to this kind of work, but it always seems to be pretty successful. I actually find the most interesting aspect of Terrifier 2 to be the release of it and all of the marketing that led up to it. The fact that it's a film that was independently released into theaters and unrated, and it was able to create all of this buzz around it, I think is pretty cool. I was just reading an article yesterday talking about Terrifier 2's success in theaters and how distributors have taken notice of these type of event screenings. Obviously, it seems that distributors in theaters would like to recreate the success of Terrifier 2, and I hope that means actually giving a voice and a chance to indie horror filmmakers who are taking a chance and trying something new. In many ways, the release of Terrifier 2 did feel very similar to the B movies and the grindhouse films of the 70s and 80s, in which you would have these smaller films that would just kind of do the theater circuit. They would pop up in different cities or drive-ins here and there. I think there was only one theater around me that was playing Terrifier 2 when it was initially released, and unfortunately it was always playing at a time that I just couldn't go to see it. So it definitely helped build up that anticipation. And I miss that. I miss that anticipation and that having to hunt for a film. I remember being a kid in the 90s and wanting to see certain films and having to try to track them down in the video stores in my area. And sometimes they weren't available, sometimes you had to special request them, but that hunt, that chase for the films always made it so much sweeter when you finally did get them and you finally did get to watch them. And I've missed that feeling. Obviously, streaming has its benefits, but it's also spoiled us. And I find that I don't always appreciate films as much as I once did. Okay, so those are all of my rambling thoughts about Terrifier 2. Again, didn't hate it, didn't love it. And while I would not consider myself a hardcore fan of the Terrifier films, I am genuinely interested to see where this series goes next. Let me know what you thought of Terrifier 2, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for watching.